Right, so here we have the standard high-end meta build. 3-piece Providence using Vigilance, Perfect Glass Cannon, Foxes, Coyotes, and Contractors. What if I told you... Don't know why I'm putting a weird voice on. What if I told you that, as a technicality, the best in-slot weapon on this is not the FAMAS? Now, I do like adding in, as a technicality, there's 3 reasons why FAMAS is outperformed by the weapon I have in my hand, the L86. 1, LMGs weirdly get a higher headshot multiplier, so I'm getting 10% more headshot damage. 2, due to a 610 RPM, I'm able to make so much more use of Strained, which allows me to do, at the top end, a lot more DPS. Third reason is on an AR, the most damage to targets out of cover you can get is 10%. On an LMG, it's 12. We do also have the lovely little caveat of the simple fact of we're wearing Contractor's gloves, which is 10% more damage to LMGs. The L86 is in fact an LMG, but this can also work both ways, the L86 being an LMG. 1, it is inherently a little bit harder to handle because LMGs just are. 2, because it's an LMG, it also suffers from what I like to call Curse of the Suppressed. So although as a technicality it can, and it does, out DPS the FAMAS, there are 2 catches to this. Well, 3. 1, specifically here we're talking about the meta best in slot high-end DPS build. You can mix around other builds and the L86 will fall short. 2, DPS counts for nothing if you can't hit your shots. Although the L86 isn't particularly hard to handle, it is harder to handle than the FAMAS. That being said, with a little bit of practice, you can get pretty damn comfortable with this weapon. I used to use this weapon religiously. I was pretty adept at it, and then I met Hutchler and I stopped playing with this weapon for some weird reason, and I've recently picked it back up again and just trying to get back into it. The third reason is obviously, like I said, the suppressed. If your enemy doesn't pop out of cover and you can't shoot them, 1, you can't make use of that juicy 12% detox natively on the weapon. 2, you just can't hit them full stop. So although it can out DPS, there are some hefty things going against it. Now, I am not trying to convert anyone over to the ways of the LMGs. LMGs are inherently bad simply just because of suppressed. That's it. Along with the fact that they are on the lower end of pretty much every weapon type DPS. The L86 RPK, Blue Screen, and Pestilence are the main exceptions in terms of LMGs. You could also add Sleipnir to this. However, Sleipnir is also the king of suppressed, so using Sleipnir against anything other than Chungas or raid bosses is kind of a don't do it. Just don't. So, how much does the L86 actually outperform FAMAS? Well, this is actually going to entirely depend on what you roll your third attribute. I know a lot of people like to put damage to armor on there. However, this is the most suboptimal. Well, not the most. Weapon swap would probably be the most. But in terms of like your main 3 choices, and one of them is not one that you would normally consider, but you've got damage to health, damage to armor, and rate of fire. Rate of fire is... we'll get back to it in a second. However, between damage to armor and damage to health is actually the most optimal. So for the purpose of the testing that I have done, and the spreadsheets to follow, you have to imagine that we can only equip one weapon. Okay? and that will kind of give you insight into my trade of thinking with this, because when you enable yourself to be able to go, well, if I just swap weapon, you kind of get the best of both worlds rather than what is actually the most optimal in this one singular world. So let's begin with the spreadsheets. Now, using the build I showed earlier, converting it into a formula, as well as utilizing a FAMAS and an L86, we are able to see here that the top being FAMAS, then an L86 with rate of fire, and then an L86 with health damage. We are able to see here that with rate of fire, the L86 just completely outperforms the FAMAS. However, the one with the health attribute is directly comparable. It loses 0.45% on body, but it gains nearly 2% on headshot, which is quite impressive. However, the FAMAS has that pesky 21% damage to health, and Chungers, Warhounds, etc. are a thing. So, if we now do the exact same calculations again, but remove the Contractor's Gloves damage to armor and put in the health damage, which the second one doesn't, we can see here that although the FAMAS wins, the L86 with health damage, I mean, it's lower, but it's not too far behind. However, the one with rate of fire has severely dropped off, pushing us down below the 10% mark. Now, I can already hear you asking, well, what about damage to armor? Well, it's alright, I've got that covered as well. So for this, the FAMAS is going to remain the exact same because we're not changing any roles or attributes on that, whereas the L86 is getting its 6% damage to armor, pushing it to a total of 12%. We can still see here that the rate of fire, L86 is going to win. However, when it comes to the L86 with damage to armor, it's no longer as close. The L86 is completely outperforming the FAMAS now at this point. But again, those pesky Chungers exist. So here we are again. This time we've removed all the damage to armor and we've put in the damage to health. The problem is the only weapon that has damage to health is going to be the lovely FAMAS, at which point, yeah, damage to armor is not really actually going to do you, well, it's not doing anything, and you had 12% of it. So yeah, have fun, I suppose. Just for a more visual comparison, the top list is versus armor, the bottom one is versus health. As you can see, versus armor, the L86 with rate of fire as well as the L86 with a health attribute both completely outperform the FAMAS. However, when it comes to shooting health, it goes FAMAS, L86, then L86 with rate of fire. Then swapping out the health attribute for an armor attribute against an armored target, it goes L86 rate of fire, armor, then FAMAS, but against a health target, FAMAS, rate of fire, L86 with an armor attribute. In case you're not picking up what I'm putting down, I am telling you that damage to armor on your LMGs, specifically on an LMG build, your LMG is your main weapon, or your only weapon, however you want to look at it. Damage to armor actually isn't giving you that much, and we can show that with this. So this has them all ranked in highest DPS. Red is against health, blue is against armor, so top DPS is FAMAS against health, then the L86 rate of fire against armor, L86 with armor against armor, L86 with health against health, L86 with health against armor, FAMAS against armor, L86 with rate of fire against health, and then L86 with armor against health. Now, for a direct comparison, if we look at the L86 with armor and the L86 with health, both against armor, so that's the blue ones. On the right hand side, they're the numbers that are highlighted in blue. That is a total difference of 3.37%. So swapping your armor attribute on your L86 to health is only going to drop your overall DPS by 3.37%. However, when you get to a health target, there is going to be a difference of 8% in favour of the health attribute. This means that in terms of optimal DPS, health damage on your LMG is more effective. I'm smiling into the microphone like an idiot. Now, there is a huge caveat to this, as you can potentially tell. The top two are FAMAS against health and L86 with rate of fire against armor. So why not just use an L86 with rate of fire against armored targets and a FAMAS against those pesky chungers and warhounds? Well, that's the big brain strats. This is why I've said earlier, we're going to imagine we can only equip one weapon. So if you have an LMG build, your main weapon is an LMG, you stick to your LMG, health damage is more optimal. And this has been a very long, convoluted way of just showing that the L86 is one of the most ridiculously powerful weapons in the game. The only issue it has is the slight hiccups with the handling, which are easily solved with practice, and the Curse of the Suppressed, which is not easily solved. However, if you've been paying attention to the footage in the background, I'm on heroic, I've got 3 directives on, I've not suppressed a single enemy yet. So yeah, there you have it. L86, potentially absolutely busted, a little bit ridiculous, harder to handle, but potentially worth the payoff. Give it a go if you haven't. And if you do have an LMG build with damage to armor on, I would suggest swapping that bad boy to damage to health. I have damage to health on this. I practice what I preach. I'm not trying to steer you wrong. I genuinely have damage to health on all of my LMGs, apart from the ones where I'm going for maximum burst, where I have rate of fire. The only LMGs where I have damage to armor on are the exotics and the spiderweb one with perfect sadist, just because bleed takes effect from damage to armor. That's it. Anyway, have fun, good luck. I died. It's bad for my health.